one, and then we'll deal with the second question there with once again with you, Nick. This one is more of a levies dispute. So there are costs that are being passed on to the tenant, which were not stipulated on the lease agreement, and these are just extra costs such as parking and sewage. But the question goes as follows: we all understand, the reader, that levies are not usually passed on onto the tenant, unless usage of water, etc., can then be shown. They have a lease in place, they say, Nick. In a fairly new development, the lease agreement only stipulated that prepaid electricity is for the tenant's account. However, the levy statements received from the landlord tabulate a usage of extra things such as sewage, parking, and heating pumps, which the tenant refuses to pay, as this was not stipulated in the lease that they speak of. Then the question raises that the landlord states that still the tenant is liable to pay these. And then our reader goes on to, or our viewer says, it's getting extremely bitter at this point, and we would like to resolve this. Nick?
Perfect. So this is another example of why it's very important to get a good lease agreement in place, have a good lease agreement, and get advice if you really need to with regards to your tenants. So you as a landlord are entitled to pass on particular charges to your tenant while they're using the premises. Okay, so rental is the remuneration payable by the tenant to the landlord for the use and enjoyment of the premises. Okay, and then you can agree that certain other charges are passed on to your tenant in the circumstances. Okay, that would normally include your water, your electricity, sewage, etc. Okay, but those charges are not necessarily for the tenant's account by virtue of the fact that a lease agreement is in place. These are specific things that you have to agree are payable over and above your rental. Okay, and the idea is basically, at a very fundamental level, you can agree to rent out a property and say you accept a rental amount, whatever, 10,000 Rand. It can be agreed that your electricity, water is actually going to come out of that 10,000 Rand use and enjoyment. It's got to be specifically agreed that you're going to take the rental amount and then the other charges, okay, are on top of the particular rental amount. So in a case like this, where the lease agreement only stipulates a prepaid electricity amount, that is what you're going to be entitled. You cannot simply add on additional charges because you believe that they belong to the tenant, but it's not stipulated within the lease agreement. In particular, something like, in this case, there's a parking charge that has now been levied onto the tenant's account. Now, that's not necessarily utility. That is, if anything, another rental charge, because you're allowing them the use and enjoyment of a particular parking space in the circumstances. So unfortunately, if this is a circumstance where the lease agreement is silent on the additional charges, and remember, if the lease says something like utilities, there's an argument about what exactly that refers to. But if the lease agreement only says prepaid electricity and doesn't mention water, sewage, the additional parking, then I'm afraid that is what is enforceable in the circumstances. You're only going to be able to get your electricity, and the other charges, the tenant has every right to say, no, I never agreed to pay these charges over and above the rental amount that I am paying. So once again, another great example. Please, everyone, have a look at your lease agreements, make sure they're up to date and they say exactly what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress it enough there once again. Thank you, Nick. And then